Hi, welcome back to the notorious and controversial Napoleon Memoirs. We'll see if it keeps turning off. The other side has games. I don't know if you guys noticed that. Games, tricks, and lies. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, so it's time to get in to the memoirs of Count Charles Tristan de Montslon, the suspected poisoner of Napoleon. Okay. On the 4th of August, the emperor, yielding to the advice of Bertrand and Savary, dictated to Count Las Casas a new protest and commissioned him to be the bearer of it to London. But Captain Maitland, on this point, refused to take the orders of even Lord Keith. It was impossible to obtain from him anything more than a transmission of simple protest. Protest at sea on board the Bellerophon, August 4th, 1815. In the face of God and man, I solemnly protest against the injury which has been committed upon me by the violation of my most sacred rights. This is Napoleon speaking, in forcibly disposing of my person and liberty. I came freely on board the Bellerophon, and I am not a prisoner. I am the guest of England. I am come hither, even at the recommendation of the captain, who has stated that he had orders from the government to receive me and convey me to England with my suite, if that was agreeable to me. I presented myself in good faith and came to place myself under the protection of the laws of England. As soon as I set my foot on board the Bellerophon, I felt myself on the soil of the British people. If the orders issued by the government to the captain of the Bellerophon to receive myself and my suite were merely intended as a snare, then they have forfeited their honor and tarnished the glory of their flag. If such an act was really done, it would be in vain for England in future to speak of her faith, her laws, and her liberty. British faith will have perished in the hospitality of the Bellerophon. I appeal to history. It will say that an enemy who for 20 years carried on war against the English people came in the day of his misfortune to seek an asylum under her laws. And what more splendid proof could he give of his confidence and esteem? But how did England respond to such magnanimity? She pretended to offer the hand of hospitality to her enemy, and when he trusted to her fidelity, she immolated him. Napoleon, from the middle of the night, we were under sail, plunging through a raging sea in order to reach Start Bay, the place of rendezvous indicated by signals there to await the arrival of the Northumberland, which was being prepared for sea with all haste at Portsmouth. The government was anxious at any cost to prevent the emperor from remaining longer in contact with the population. Their attitude caused the government uneasiness, as it was not easy to see how far their usual influence might extend over the crew of our ship. Officers and sailors unanimously and loudly testified their indignation at the ungenerous breach of hospitality. Anchorage in Start Bay is bad, and we were horribly tossed about by the waves. And for many days, dreadful seasickness diverted our minds from our sufferings. Towards the close of the day, the Northumberland and two frigates filled with troops cast anchor by our side. Immediately afterwards, Lord Keith came on board the Bellerophon, accompanied by Admiral Sir George Cockburn, whom he presented to the Emperor, and who was the bearer of a communication by virtue of which he was about to convey him to St. Helena. The instructions of Lord Bathurst, Minister of the Colonies, gave directions to subject the baggage to the most minute examination, required the surrender to the admiral of all money or articles of value in gold or diamonds. Our arms were to be demanded as prisoners of war. The last point gave rise to one of those silent but sublime scenes to which my pen is wholly unable to do justice, but the impressiveness of which everyone will understand by reading the simple but faithful narration of what took place. Admirals had been received by the Emperor in the state cabin. Bertrand and myself stood behind, with our backs to the stern windows. General Gorgo remained by the starboard guns, prepared for any event. The Emperor, a few feet in front of us, appeared to expect that he had only to receive their adieus when Lord Keith, at length resigning himself to the execution of an order which was at variance with the whole of his long and brilliant military career, approached the Emperor and said in a voice subdued by lively emotion, "England demands your sword." The Emperor, by a convulsive movement, placed his hand upon that sword, which an Englishman dared to demand. The terrible expression of his eye was the only reply. Never had it been more powerful or penetrating. Old Admiral was astounded. His tall figure shrunk, his head white with years fell upon his breast like that of a criminal shrinking before the sentence of his judge. The Emperor retained his sword. The two admirals saluted the Emperor with respect accompanied by deep emotion and withdrew without uttering a word to disturb the solemn impression which the scene had made upon all beholders, English as well as French. Baggage was not examined till we were on board the Northumberland. This duty was then performed by the secretary of Sir George Cockburn, and for form's sake, each of us surrendered what he pleased of the money which he carried. The Grand Marshal gave up 4,000 Napoleons as constituting the Emperor's chest. We kept secret about 400,000 francs in gold, from 3 to 400,000 francs in valuables and diamonds, and letters of credit for more than 4 million francs. It was now become the duty of the Emperor to select those who were to accompany him. We expected his decision. I doubt that information. All of us, with the exception of one poor lady who was for a moment agitated by painful regrets, were eager to give proofs of our devotedness and to show that our attachment was to his person and not to his scepter. And the more ingratitude and defection we had seen, the greater honor we attached to the privilege of being allowed to follow his fortunes. Savory, having been excluded by the ministry, was in despair. He loved the Emperor with all his heart and with such affection that I can compare it to nothing else than a dog for his master. Alaman was reminded of his condemnation. He thought he was about to be delivered up to the vengeance of the royalists, but he condemned death and said, smiling, "May the devil carry off those who at the Isle of Aix preached up to us the hospitality of the English. Come, Savory, what will you do? We have during 20 years so often escaped this inevitable death that it must at last overtake us. My only embarrassment is this. I should rather have been killed by a Mameluke at the pyramids or by an Englishman at Waterloo than by a Frenchman on the plain of Grenelle." I felt thoroughly happy when the Emperor, having sent for me, said to me affectionately, "Montalon, I've selected you without speaking to you because I reckon on you." Bertrand does not hesitate this time. Countless causes has begged me to accept of him. Do you know him? His conversation pleases me. He appears to be very well informed, and I believe him to be devoted to my cause. What a singular destiny has his been. 24 years ago, he emigrated, disguised as a jockey, in the suite of Louis XVI's family, and now he's my chamberlain going into voluntary exile with me? Bring him in. General Gergo would not on any account quit the Emperor. As an officer of artillery, he had attracted the Emperor's notice on several battlefields, and especially at Wagram. I had, since that battle, been attached to his person as first officer of ordnance. The Emperor obtained permission from Admiral Keith to consider Monsieur de las Casas as private secretary, and he consequently became one of the officers. When once the destiny of each of us was fixed, a few hours of calm succeeded our cruel anxieties, everything to be in its original state. So true is it that we French accommodate ourselves instantaneously to our good as to our evil fortune. I feel it my duty to notify the instructions given by the government to Rear Admiral Cockburn and by Admiral Keith to Captain Maitland. Orders from Admiral Keith to Captain Maitland, commander of His Majesty's ship Bellerophon, in Rhodes at Start Bay, August 6, 1815. All arms of a description are to be taken from the French, of whatever rank, who are on board His Majesty's ship under your command. Arms are to be carefully collected and to remain under your charge as long as the French remain on board the Bellerophon. They will afterwards be under the charge of the captain of the ship to which the said individuals may be transferred. This order was not fully executed. Our swords were left us, and only the firearms were taken. All right. We've been through this so many times with the memoirs, so I put up a link on the blog. It's so interesting to listen to all of them because we've been through this. When they take the arms and Napoleon's not give up his sword for anything. That's how he was. He was going to do what he was going to do. Anyway. All right, time for Italian. This guy's an Italian. Talking about aristocrats. Napoleon's an aristocrat. Nobody's against aristocrats. Napoleon was descended from royalty. It's not against aristocrats. It's against people who are grifters, basically. And some aristocrats are actually criminals and grifters. And people need to be aware of that. Okay, so we're going to do our best with Italian like we always do. L'imperatore, continuando la sua critica, condannava fortemente le da lui detti fanciullaggini storici risibilmente portati a cielo dai trattatori e dai commentatori e che non provavano altro se non come mali i primi storici che la misero in voga giudicassero degli uomini e della loro condizione. Non ha ragioni osservava con tanto esaltarsi la continenza di Scipioni e la si discorri prolisamenti sulla calma d'Alessandro, di Cesare e di altri per aver dormito placidamente il giorno prima della battaglia. Potrei bene un monaco che non conosce donne e il cui viso si inflamma al solo nominarli ai scriveri a gran merito il non avere Scipione violato quella che il solo caso poneva in poter suo, quando ne aveva tanti altri a sua disposizione. Sarebbe lo stesso che un affamato si desse gran merito per essersi mosso tranquillamente vicino ad una mensa squisitamente imbattite per non esservisi slanciato sopra con avidità. Quanto a dormire il giorno prima della battaglia, non un generale, non un soldato tra noi compie meno di 20 volte questo grande miracolo. E tutto il loro eroismo non stava che nella lunga fatica sostenuto il giorno antecedente. A ciò il gran maresciallo aggiungeva chi poteva dire di averlo visto dormire non solo la vigilia, ma durante la battaglia. Ciò accadeva necessariamente, diceva l'imperatore, perché durante le nostre battaglie, alcune volte 3 giorni, la natura aveva anch'essa i suoi diritti. Io quindi approfittava dal più piccolo momento di libertà e dormiva saporitamente quanto più potevo. L'imperatore aveva dormito sul campo di battaglia di Wagram e di Bautzen mentre ferveva il combattimento e dentro l'ambito dai colpi nemici, su di che diceva che oltre a obbedire così ad un bisogno, il capo di un gran esercito ne ritrae il vantaggio di non essere mosso nelle sue decisioni da parziali movimenti, cui sarebbe stato testimone oculare. Se vedi dalla relazione di tutti i corpi e dalla loro azione reciproca e definitiva, continuava l'imperatore a dire che in Roland e nello atteso Cesare erano molti circostanze della guerra gallici che non poteva comprendere. La correre degli svizzeri il cammino presto il motivo che si dava di questa loro invasione, il tempo voluto per passare la suona e la rettezza dei Cesari che riedeva in Italia a prendere le legioni d'Aquileia e poi trovava ancora gli invasori affannatisi a carico ai fiumi, erano per lui tutti così incomprensibili, soggiungevano esseri meno oscuro il modo di stabilire i quartieri d'inverno e stendersi de treveri avanti e come che non facessimo le meraviglie sui lavori immensi a cui i generali sottomettevano i loro soldati, quali scavar fossati, alzar ripari e muri e gallerie. L'imperatore rispondeva che allora tutte le forze si impiegavano in costruzioni sui luoghi medesimi, mentre ai nostri essi si impiegavano nei trasporti. Non dubitava però che i soldati antichi lavorassero essi più dei moderni. Il suo fratello argomento manifestò il progetto di scrivere qualche cosa. Del resto, continuava la storia antica, avrà un lungo periodo al sistema di guerra che io sovente come doveva essere ad i nostri sistemi dei tempi di Torino e di Vauban si è mutato. I lavori di campagna sono divenuti inutili ed anche l'utilità delle presenti fortificazioni la credo molto problematica. La gran quantità della bomba degli obici hanno cambiato tutto. La difesa non sta più contro le orizzontali, ma contro le curvi. Niuna delle piazze antiche sono in grado presentemente di sostenere un assedio di una più serie lungamente conservata e le sole spesse di loro manutenzione sono tanti che nessun paese è in grado di farli. Le rendite di tutta la Francia non bastavano per la linea di Fiandra. che le esterni fortificazioni costavano il quarto o il quinto delle spese che sarebbe stata necessaria alle casomatti, ai magazzini, alla costruzione a prova di bomba che sono ora tanto necessari come provvedere. L'imperatore menava lamento soprattutto della debolezza delle attuali costruzioni e muro, dipendenti da un vizio ingenito nel sistema del genio. Molti spezzeria egli fatto per Dio, ma senza ritrarne vantaggio, penetrato al vivo da questi nuovi verità. L'imperatore aveva immaginato un sistema affatto opposto al corrente. Consisteva nel munirsi dei pezzi d'artiglieria di grosso calibro, collocati al di là delle linee magistrali verso il nemico e ne difendere invece queste stesse linee magistrali con una grandissima quantità di cannoni di campo mobili insieme chissà il nemico era debotto arrestato nei suoi approcci perché costretto ad attaccare artiglierie grossissime con cannoni di piccolo calibro contro degli stavano tutti questi enormi batterie cui si venivano ad aggiungere le minori e gli altri mezzi di difesa e molti di piccoli pezzi si potevano spingere anche innanzi atti come erano a seguire per la loro mobilità tutti i movimenti del nemico. Assedianti sarebbe allora accorsa l'artiglieria d'assedio, la trincea di necessità doveva essere aperta, intanto si acquistava tempo ed era raggiunto il vero oggetto della fortificazione. L'imperatore mise un simile sistema ad esecuzione con molto frutto e meraviglia grandi della ingegneria nella difesa di Vienna e di Dresda avrebbe anche voluto adottarlo a Parigi, città che egli non credeva difendibili se non in tal guisa. So once again, Napoleon's explaining how he wins wars. When Napoleon was on the Bellerophon, we were just talking about him being on the Bellerophon, which is they gave him the idea that they were going to let him live in England, but then as soon as he was on the ship, they trapped him. And, they say they didn't give him the idea, but they did. But they, were shady about it. Anyway, so when he found out that he was trapped and they were going to send him to this tropical island, he was going to kill himself, and he certainly was ready for that. He had poison on him, and only Las Casas reports this, and this only happened in front of Las Casas. So it's in all the Las Casas memoirs. Where Napoleon says, "This is it. I'm gonna kill myself, and you guys are all gonna be free. You're gonna all go home. Everything's gonna be fine. I'm just gonna die." And then Las Casas says, "No, no, no. You have to write your memoirs. You have to write your story." And Napoleon's like, "I'll do it for my son, and you'll write my memoirs, and it'll get to my son, and I'll be able to give my knowledge to my son." So much of what he's saying is he's trying to give his son the ability to take back France. This story is so deep. This whole Las Casas is written for his son. And his son, I believe, did get it, even though he was basically a prisoner in the Habsburg palace. Somehow he did get Las Casas' memoirs, and it really did radicalize him. And he did get killed. He wasn't going to back down. I believe they tried to turn him into a puppet, because somebody who's like Napoleon's son, if he would have been a puppet, that would have been fantastic for the people that love to use puppets to run things. He was not going to go for it, and then he Like, you can never find out if he was murdered because the murders aren't going to tell you, and there's no witnesses in that palace. So he was obviously murdered, but that can never be established because there's no one ever going to admit that he was murdered. But people died a lot in that palace, right on time, right on schedule. I, listen to the memoirs. Whenever someone needs to go, and they go of natural causes, of course. So these are people who really know how to create these natural causes deaths. This is something they had very well figured out by the 1800s. All right, so once again, Lavalette is in jail, awaiting execution. His wife is losing her health and her mind. His crime is running the post office, so this is to terrorize the population and to not doing anything, just going along with the new regime, which is gonna do whatever they want. And we're still under that regime, and that is what I'm saying. We're still under this regime, and I would love for it to stop. Very much so. Okay, so right, he had an aristocrat who was trying to convert him to Catholicism. Our last thing, he was not into it at all. Okay. Lucky he escaped, but he does escape. The other ones get killed, though. Le général Bonaparte, dont j'étais alors, était con. Ma vie envoyée à Paris en 1796 peut y suivre les mouvements des deux conseils et du directoire. Je lui avais écrit la vérité avec une franchise qui lui fit sentir tous les dangers et toute la honte qu'il trouverait consacrée par son assentiment. Les coups d'État frappés le 18 fructidor, le directoire que nous prendrons mes opinions, et s'il nous a pas mon punir, et ce témoignage un ressentiment assez vif peu que le général Bonaparte ne crut pas devoir m'amener à Paris. Quand il revint de l'armée d'Italie, il me laissa au congrès de Rastatt et je ne vins les joindre que 3 semaines avant son départ pour l'expédition d'Égypte. Tous mes camarades avaient été avancés. Le général désirait aussi me récompenser, mais ne voulant pas s'exposer à un refus de la part du gouvernement, il s'est mis en tête de me faire épouser Mademoiselle de Beauharnais, un jeu qui, chez la compagnie à la trésorerie, peut presser l'expédition des fonds dont la marine avait besoin à Toulon. Il fit diriger sa voiture vers le nouveau boulevard pour causer à son aise. Je ne peux vous faire chef d'escadron, mais dit-il, il faut donc que je vous marie, je vous faire épouser Emily de Beauharnais. Elle est très belle et bien élevée. La connaissez-vous? Je l'ai vue 2 fois, mais mon général, je suis sans fortune et nous allons en Afrique et je pourrais bien y être tué. Qui deviendra le pauvre veuf? Je n'ai pas d'ailleurs du goût pour le mariage. Il faut se marier pour avoir des enfants. C'est le grand bout de la vie. Être tué, cela est possible. Alors, elle sera la veuve d'un de mes éducants, d'un défenseur de la patrie. Elle aura une pension. Elle pourra s'établir avantageusement. Maintenant, fille d'un émigré, personne ne veut d'elle. Ma femme ne peut la conduire dans le monde. La pauvre enfant est digne d'une meilleure sœur. Il faut que cette affaire soit terminée promptement. Causez ce soir avec Madame Bonaparte. La mère a donné son consentement. Dans 8 noce, je vous donnerai 4 jours de bon temps. Vous viendrez me joindre à Toulon les 29. Il me parlait ainsi le 9. Je riais pendant tous ces discours. Enfin, je ferai tout ce que vous voudrez. Mais la jeune personne voudra-t-elle de moi? Je ne veux pas la contraindre. C'est un enfant qui s'ennuie à la pension, qui sera malheureuse chez sa mère pendant votre absence. Elle ira vivre avec son grand-père à Fontainebleau. Vous ne serez pas tué et dans 2 ans, vous la retrouverez. Alors, c'est une affaire arrangée. Dites au crochet de retourner à la maison. This is super interesting. So, Napoleon loved to arrange marriages. Weird thing about him. So he says, Lavalette, he's going into the history of how he married Emily de Beauharnais. Napoleon showed up one day. He said, I get this great wife for you. She's beautiful. She's well brought up. You're going to love her. And he said, but she's the daughter of an emigre. The emigres were like viewed as traitors. All this trumped up stuff. But anyway, I don't know what to do with her, but she really wanted to marry his brother, and Napoleon would not allow it. But he fixed Emily up with Lavalette, who was the most honest person he knew, and he really loved Lavalette. And he thought Lavalette would have been a really good husband to her. And Lavallette's saying, look, I'll do whatever you want. I don't even want to marry. What if I die in Egypt? They were on the way to Egypt. He says, well, you might die in Egypt. She'll get a pension. She'll be the widow of a hero. It'll be all right. You won't die in Egypt. You're going to marry her. It's going to be great. He's like, what if she doesn't want me? Whatever. She actually didn't want him. But he won her over. That's what's so interesting. She was madly in love with Louis Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, who was handsome. And he turned into the worst husband in the world to her cousin, Hortense de Beauharnais. Because he was madly in love with her. And he couldn't stand that she was never going to love anybody but Napoleon. Drove him crazy. He was overshadowed by I'm talking about Louis. Louis was overshadowed by Napoleon in every way, and even his wife preferred Napoleon. So it literally drove him insane. It's a very tragic story, but she loved Napoleon. She couldn't love anybody but him. This is my whole story. My whole story is this is my whole story. She couldn't love anybody but him. There was no way. This is the tragic story of Napoleon and Hortense. They could never be together, and they only loved each other. And this really affected history. And then she raised her son to vindicate Napoleon. And that was Louis's son. And he's the one who ended up with Les Causes' memoirs. He's the one who got all the information from Napoleon. Because his son was, I believe, killed. But somehow Hortense's youngest son made it and got all of Napoleon's information, and he took back France. So they think they stop us, but we come from behind sometimes. If we have support. This is a very, very old war we're fighting right now. Anyway, so it's time for Spanish. This is the biggest story of all time. And it involves everything. And it's fascinating, and it's still going on today. And I'm doing everything I can to help people understand that this is an eternal story. And everyone is a part of it. Everyone. You're all a part of this story. And you all need to play your role. 18 de septiembre. El estado del enfermo a las 10 de la mañana era el siguiente. Los ojos abiertos, descarnados y la conjuntiva amarilla. Los labios y encías sin color, la lengua cargada de una pasta blanquecina, la piel amarillenta y pálida en extremo, el color del rostro verdoso, dolor de cabeza, particularmente hacia la frente y las cejas, pesadilla, incubos, sensación incómoda de calor en el tórax, respiración difícil, suspiros profundos, frío glacial en los pies y en las piernas que se disipa con la aplicación de lienzos calientes, la piel seca y ardiente, el pulso débil y frecuente. 80. La región epigástrica dolorosa, la presión, pesadez en el abdomen, inapetencia y un adormecimiento casi invencible. Yo traté de sacarle de aquel estado de letargo y le hablé del cuidado que exigía su salud. Doctor me dijo, dejadme mientras que se duerme en uno dichoso cuando viene al sueño desaparecen todas las necesidades, los cuidados y privaciones, y se volvía a echar en la almohada. A fuerza de súplicas pude conseguir hacerle tomar un purgante bilioso que le hizo gran bien y le alivió el violento dolor de cabeza que padecía. 19 de septiembre, el emperador ya ha pasado la noche algo mejor. Sin embargo, los síntomas mórbidos apenas ha perdido nada de su intensidad. El dolor de cabeza ha disminuido a la verdad el color verdoso de la cara y el amarillo de la conjuntiva se ha modificado un poco. La sensación de pesadez en el abdomen se ha disipado, pero en su lugar se ha sentido un dolor insoportable. El hígado particularmente es mucho más vivo que antes. El pulso está más regular, la piel menos seca y menos ardiente. 20 de septiembre sigue en el mismo estado el emperador. Sale pesar en el coche, pero a poco rato vuelve abrumado de cansancio. 21 de septiembre, igual estado. Le aconsejo tónicos en lo interior, vegetarios en el brazo y en la nuca, y especialmente insisto en que se le abra un cauterio en el brazo izquierdo. Mas Napoleón desecha todas las recetas de parte del estado en que se hallaba el gran mariscal y el general Montolón. 22 de septiembre, el emperador está mejor. Tomó el baño a las 9, queriendo tomar el aire, ensayó a ver si podía andar. Luego montó en el coche y después a caballo, hasta que muy pronto la fatiga e incomodidad le obligaron a retirarse y se metió en la cama. So, Antomarchi is describing the horrible symptoms that Napoleon's going through. He's just dying, and they're killing him, and he tries to walk. He can't even walk. After just a few years, he was like the strongest man in the world, and after a few years of this horrible treatment by the people who own the English government, who are the richest people in the world, who still own the English government, who do these sadistic things, and it's unbelievable. So you have to wonder, don't they think they're people like us? You know, I really have to wonder about that. You know, they don't really act like they're people like we are. To do this to him, he was a good man. He did nothing but encourage manufacture and free trade and opportunities for everyone. He did marvelous things for France, and that was the problem. They couldn't have one country doing so well. It would make the other countries want that. And after only a few years, Napoleon couldn't even walk anymore. So it was this very slow, cruel murder. Can't tell you how much I want everybody to know it was done to him, because he was such a good man. He's a shining example of heroism, and I hope we all look up to him and see that we could all be a lot more like him. He fought for what was right. Schlacht bei der Favorit. Provera hatte jedoch mit Worms eroberten sie mit Tanster einer Barke sich in Mitteilung gesetzt. Daher rückte er am 17. Januar mit Tageseinbruch mit der Garnison aus und stellte sich bei der Favorit auf, morgens ließ Napoleon die 4 Regimenter zwischen der Favorit und St. Georgis aufmarschieren und hinderte so die Garnison von Mantua sich mit Provera zu vereinigen. Sie ergriff, sobald der Tag einbrach, mit der Blockadetruppen die Garnison von Mantua an, der Obergeneral dagegen Provera. In dieser Schlacht erwarb sich das 57. Regiment, denn bei Namen des fürchterlichen Kanzleien griff es die österreichischen Linien mit dem Bajonett an und warf alles, was sie da stehen leisten wollte. 2 Uhr nachmittags war die Garnison von Mantua zurückgeschlagen. Provera kapitulierte und legte die Waffen nieder, indem uns eine Menge Fahnen, bei mehrere Parks, viele Brücken parken ließ. 6000 Gefangene, worunter mehrere Generäle, blieben in unserer Gewalt. Von 22.000 Mann Proveras entkam nur der Teil der Division, welcher am 11. St. Michael angegriffen hatte und in seiner Stellung von Caldera geblieben war, und 1000 Mann, die Provera auf dem linken Schufer zur Deckung gefangen genommen oder getötet. Man nannte diese Schlacht die bei der Favorite. Am 15. drängte Joubert die ganze Armee Alvinsis vor sich her und kam auf der Bergetreppe so schnell ein, dass 6.000 bis 7.000 Mann abgeschnitten wurden. Murat trennte sich mit einer Kolonne auf Corona und rückte in Tirol ein. Das Hauptquartier kam nach Verona zurück, und Massenas Division zog sich nach Bassano. Eine Division auf Linzis begann sich an der Brenta zusammen. Man griff sie an und warf sie über die Piave hinaus. Der General Augereau marschierte nach Castelfranco und wanderte nach Treviso. Er hatte auch einige kleine Vorposting-Effekte. Ziemlich österreichische Truppen zogen sich über die Piave zurück. In Tirol füllte der Schnee alle Zugänge. Dies war das größte Hindernis, welches Joubert zu überwinden hatte. Alles besiegte jedoch die französische Infanterie. Joubert lockerte Intriente ein. Der General Victor fährt über la Vision durch die Zähle der Brände, abgehörte Nächte, um seine Bedingung mit Messina wiederherzustellen, dessen Hauptquartier in Bassano war. In mehreren kleinen Sekten machte man viel Gefangene. Überall fand man Kriege und Streiker unbedeutende Magazine. Die Armee befand sich in derselben Stellung wie nach den Schlachten von Rovereto, Bassano und der von Arcole und Bessiers danach Paris mit diesen neuen Trophäen abgeschickt in den Treffen bei St. Michael, Rivoli, Anghiari und der Favorit Villa Arissime als zwei Dritteil seiner Armee von seinen 80.000 Mann brachte er nur 25.000 wieder nach Österreich zurück. All right, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have